to stand on the stage for the next hour. And the stage is now prepared for the debate or the discussion, because you can ask questions to our presenters. We are happy that you still stayed here. Of course, some of you just stayed here for getting the award. It's just the working day, so it's okay. And yeah, it will just take us a minute for the chairs to be settled, and we will get a small group of debaters. We will be asking questions, pleasant or less pleasant. And this is what I like, because this is where we can rub against each other through the questions. And then in the end, we find out that nothing is really worth any dispute. And we would like to ask all presenters, including those from the New Zealand and from other countries, please come to the stage. It will not be long. We will just talk and go through a couple of questions. Please ask your question, no matter what kind of question. This is the conclusion of today's, and the debate will continue at the dinner and the wine that will follow. And that was Hungarian, and I'm happy that we could have some interaction in Hungarian. And before dinner, I would like to tell you, for all of you interested, we again continue tomorrow and start with the registration. And we start at 9, and Brania will have the first presentation. And in a similar pace, we will get to the end of conference, and the conference will end in approximately the same time at about 5 or 6 p.m. Tomorrow's topics will be also very interesting. We will talk about how the green roofs progressed in Slovakia. Then we will talk about wooden constructions or wooden houses, which is very important. We will also talk about passive constructions, and we will talk about recycling of cigarettes, and I don't like them because we can see it everywhere, and this is the way how to collect them, recycle them, and do something for the nature. We'll also talk about one significant thing. So there will be people from the VUB bank. They will talk about funding, because the climate change, everything changes, and also investment are increasing. So also this is something we need to deal with. This will approximately be tomorrow's topics. And now that all the speakers are seated, we can start our debate. And we should start with maybe some question of public character. And I forgot. Today we had one lady, but I don't see her now. And she was quite active lady who was objecting many of the presenters. And she called you liars and that you are falsifying the data. She was accusing you. So can you describe what kind of activist we had here? I don't know. One man once told me, it was last year, the man who is quite high in the ladder of the LinkedIn, that when you have your first hater, it means that the people see you. Something like that probably happened today here. If we have this young lady, then I would like to invite her here to the stage. I'm a Democrat, and I like to exchange also conflicting ideas. And how to put it? I like discussion with people about a problem if discussion is to the point. Of course, it can also be emotional because we are emotional species, and my wife could tell you something about that. However, the emotions should not grow or exceed something that is unnecessary in a conversation, because then it's no longer a conversation but a monologue. So let's get to the point. For me, it's a closed thing. The lady didn't accept my invitation. I can be the representative of the lady. I will be very happy to do that and to be the barking lady. But let's forget about it. We like arguments, we like facts, and we like when people talk and when they try to find common solutions. And Mr. Rappan totally doesn't regard the amount of emissions per capita. For example, Slovakia has 3 times higher emissions per inhabitant than India. Also, small countries need to reduce their emissions. This is very easy to explain. When I do the analysis on emissions, I'm dealing with the most trustworthy sources. All the analyses are coming from the European Center or European database. The database is still hot, is very recent, and it's one of the 3 important inputs into IPCC reports. And there is no clearer crystal ball. Of course, I also have my comments in a communication with the people from the center, and this is the difference. I'm also commenting on it. If I have something critical, I also offer solution, and this is important, because otherwise it just remains to be hate. Of course, we can create X of various derivatives how to assess emissions, but is the GDP data telling you something about the wealth of the population or wealth of a person in a specific country? No. And that's why it's not. There is no sense to assess the emission per capita. It's not. It's not a data that would be informative. Yeah, the lady is here. Let's give her a round of applause. Welcome. Are you Ilka? Ivana Nemetová. Yeah, that was... Let's get into the debate.
Vás ohľadom jadrových elektrární, že nezabudnite na rizika, ktoré...
And then there are other questions relative to nuclear plants and wars and stuff. So, the first thing you said that he doesn't talk about the amount of emission per capita. How do you see it? I think that per capita is regular format, statistical format based on like the data or this information can be then compared, and also the emissions can also be calculated per inhabitant and per resident. If we compare India and Slovakia, we can see that India has 3 times lower emissions per capita, and so that it can secure some lifestyle, housing, food. They spend 3 times less emissions than me, which is actually a positive thing, because they can ensure the lifestyle with lower emissions. Have you been to India? No, but I was in Asia or Malaysia, and I saw there are big social differences. And then this question also is linked to the next question that I asked relative to historical emissions. I'm sorry, I'm late. Essentially, I think that climate change is not just a technical problem. I'm an architect, and I work in this urban area, and climate change is being dealt with by all the countries, and it's been going on like that for 30 years at climate change conventions. They talk about solutions. It's like Paris Agreement that you claimed is insignificant at the moment, and all countries in the world, they try to lower the emissions according to their opportunities. And the countries as India or China, they are poorer from this perspective because the Industrial Revolution started here in Europe in the 19th century, and we have built our economy, our cities, and our roads and railways and all the system. And thereby, they created lots of emissions. And these CO2 emissions, they just don't disappear. They remain there hundreds of years. You can search, or you can find it out in any of the climate report, or for example, report of IPCC in a technical report when almost 70% they will evaporate within 50 years, and the rest within hundreds of years. I can also quote all the technical report. Yes, you can quote it, but you just need to consider it. You need to consider that also what we have put into the atmosphere 100 years ago, it's still there in atmosphere, and the planet has warmed also based on what we have put into the atmosphere 100 years ago. So to omit the historical associations, it's unfair to those countries that started their industrial revolution later than us. I think I understand what you mean, and I understand why you are going there. Let's start at the beginning. China and India are poor countries. China has the second biggest GDP worldwide, right after the United States. And it's expected that it will get higher. And India is on the 5th place. And GDP, does it say anything about the quality of life or the wealth of the population? Because I don't think so. And also this relates to Slovakia. Yes, thank you very much. And this means that we also cannot compare GDP per capita and emissions per capita. I don't say that we cannot compare it, but the GDP is not good unit of measurement to see the quality of life of inhabitants. It is some kind of some total of what the number, but it doesn't say anything of the health, living standards. Yes, when we talk about living standards, we cannot talk about the emissions, but the wealth of the country is computed through the GDP. But the life quality is measured through other metrics than the GDP. So if we want to be consistent, we need to also use consistent labels and names. Generally, we have the countries of global north that are usually richer than the developing countries. Can you get me an example? Do you know the concept of global north and global south? Try to be specific. Yeah, then this debate will be very long, and I would expect that if someone talks about what they talked about at the beginning of the conference of climate change, that they would know these concepts. But these expressions you will be not found in IPCC report. This is artificially created name or a label because there are countries and the wealth is measured through the GDP. It's a standard. And I repeat, from this perspective, China is the second richest country, and the economic analysts are measuring it, and India is on the 5th place. So let's be consistent. And if we want to tell someone that they lie and that they are making things up, let's use relevant data. Let's not use let's not be rude. No, I'm not being rude. I'm just saying that this is used in the reports of WHO. Can I get into that, because we say Vox Populi, Vox Dei, and we have people that are quite engaged in the talk. I also wanted to suggest that you don't talk about GDP because it's out of the point. And I wanted to tell you, Mr. Rapan, because then you use the argument, and Mrs. Nemetova, she noted quite well that the country takes care of 1.5 million billion inhabitants, and we take care of 5 million of inhabitants. And that's why the remark is relevant, that we need to talk about the amount of emissions per capita in order to stay relevant. And how come that China, the fact that China is on the second place doesn't mean that the people are really second richest in the world. So let's talk about the validity of the argument, whether there is any sense to measure per capita or not. I will only mention last thing because I don't want to talk about it any further. We have one planet. The one planet has one atmosphere, and the atmosphere and the planet doesn't care how many people live in the countries, but what is relevant is which country produces what kind of amount of emissions, and then we can calculate it per whatever unit you wish. But the most important thing, most important responsibility is on the level of country. The inhabitant or the resident can be responsible for himself or herself, but not for the country. The country is defined by, or actually it's, what is relevant for the country is the government that is managing the country. The inhabitant or the resident can only take care of their own impact. I would like to move on in the questions, but I would like to react. Mr. Tadani wanted to say something. Yes, I mean, because India.
Experience. And I think both of you are right, but you're talking at cross purposes. So, sorry, I need to get this off because it's confusing the hell out of me. Okay, so first off, in India, there are more millionaires in India today than there are in the United States. Okay? People have made a lot of money, and it's that 0.1% of India that enjoys all those. And what do they want? They want everything that America has, this 0.1%. And I'm really ashamed of what the country is doing because they're catering to that 0.1%. I mean, everything is really about those folks who will contribute more money to the politicians, including Mr. Modi. So, you know, in Bombay, my city, only 7% of the population, or 20 million, drive cars. Okay, that's 7%. Okay, and yet there are 600 cars sold every day in Bombay. Just think about that. And it's Europe's fault, because what you can't sell in Europe, you're selling in places like India and China. Every single car manufacturer with inefficient gas engines are selling their cars in India. So if you go anywhere in Bombay, there'll be 4 dealerships from VW. There'll be at least 2 or 3 dealerships in the one city for Mercedes, Audi. All those companies are in India selling their products and saying that you can enjoy the same lifestyle that the Americans have. So what do they want? They want single-family houses, which was never really a tradition in the cities. We had beautiful cities built mostly by British influence, and they were just wonderful places to live. And now everything is changing up. Those 4- and 5-story buildings are all being torn down for high-rise towers. And it's only luxury towers. and it's going towards basically investment properties. People don't live in those towers, they just use it as investment, which is also similar to the United States. Most of New York those towers are empty. And those pencil towers, if they're actually occupied, they flood because they just can't. When you have that little pencil tower, just think about the plumbing that's required for it. So even the developers and architects know that they're for investment. And the first pencil tower by, I can't remember his name, but when there were actually people living in there, the sewer system didn't work. So there you've paid $7.5 million for a one-bedroom apartment, and your toilet is backing up. You know, so India is following that same pathway, and that's really unfortunate. I know this personally because I had an office in India for 6 years, and 30 years ago, there was some hope of turning the ship around, at least for India, and doing lowering emissions in the construction process. Now, first off, it's very efficient because 90% of the buildings are concrete with brick infill. And that brick comes from the site. So when you dig the ground, you pull out the clay, and that same clay is used in the construction of the building. Okay? That kind of works up to 8 stories. If it goes higher, you don't have enough clay to do that from the site. So, you know, when you measure per capita in India, let's get back to the point here, you're only talking about 0.1% that is using is emitting tons of emission. 99% of the country, you know, is not that, okay? Now, they don't enjoy the qualities of urbanism, and they don't enjoy a quality of life. It's basically a struggle to survive, and those 99% really don't care. They will cut a tree down anywhere and everywhere to get heat so they can, cook their food. So that's a reality. So I think it's, in one sense, you can't, talk about per capita because it's really skewed. And that's the same thing in China. It's only the east coast of China that's producing all the emissions, all the major cities along the east coast. The western part of China produces no emissions because, again, it's a question of survival, and they just don't have those luxuries.
Tuto by som vstúpil, excuse me, že koľko ľudí toľko chutí, a toto je krásne na týchto debatách. Už vidím, že ďalší už vás cúka, už chcete niečo povedať. Ja by som teda odovzdal slovo samozrejme aj Angelike Tomášovej. Could you please give us the mic? Okay.
Yes, you can hear me. So I would like to complement what was said, because I think what we just witnessed here today is a very typical debate also ongoing at the international negotiations, where there is the one perspective is we look at the countries who emits the most, we should all reduce, we have one planet, all ends up in the atmosphere, and we will all suffer from climate change. Meanwhile, we have the other angle, which is the historical angle. So who is responsible of it? Who has emitted the most when we take into consideration a time horizon? And this is why those international negotiations under the United Nations Framework Convention on climate change are so difficult. And this is also why it was a tremendous success to reach an agreement on the Paris Agreement, because all countries need to agree, all countries are behind the negotiation table, and they have very different circumstances. I think we need to mention here also 2 concepts discussed and hopefully being implemented soon. The concept of just transition and just resilience, and that means no one should be left behind, even though we all need to do mitigation and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, because otherwise we will really face serious problems. We need to take into consideration first the different timelines. Meanwhile, maybe the global north has more capacities when it comes to finances, when it comes to research, when it comes to knowledge. We may do it more faster, and the global south still needs to peak and develop. But hopefully, if we are able to offer technologies to them, they will go on this other pathway, on the low carbon and climate neutral pathway. But first, we also need to do it here, right? And when it comes to just resilience, that relates to the countries which are the least developed. Unfortunately, the least developed countries will be the most hit by the impact of climate change. And there we really need to come up with the way how we can support those who actually don't really have anything to do with this, but they will lose their homes, they will lose their islands, and it's already happening now. So a lot of open-ended questions from my side. I just really wanted to complement because I feel that these are crucial points to mention in this debate when it comes to the international level.
Okay, Luigi?
Yeah, thanks. No, I would like maybe without, I don't know, compliment, but just kind of providing some suggestions, Jan, to that presentation. I think there were a couple of points which probably you should address in a broader perspective, in the sense that for me, I think you kind of referred to the, you gave a lot of, you highlighted the emissions from Europe, said, you know, we are the only one that are reducing emissions, 7%, I don't remember exactly. I think yes, that's true, but I think Europe is an emitter. I think Europe has emitted a lot in the past, is the largest market in the world. I mean, we are 500 million consumers in Europe. I think it sounds a little bit like that if I highlight only the fact that it's only Europe is reducing, it seems like, you know, we should stop. We should slow down, which is not the case in my view. I think the point is Europe has to demonstrate leadership and can push, because of this 500 million population market, can push other regions of the world to reduce, like, because as you say, emissions, they fly, you know, right? It is not, so we live in one world. And also probably another suggestion is the one related to you made a very nice presentation about the energy mix. This was with reference to the Republic of Slovakia. I think, and this is obviously not your fault, I think this is a bit of systemic fault, I didn't see there energy efficiency. I mean, in the energy mix, we do not consider energy efficiency. And I think because you are gathering very interesting data, it will be very interesting from you also to indicate what could be the contribution of the energy efficiency. So, because it seems that the data you collect are very much supply focused, while I think the energy efficiency first principle, you know, the first fuel is the fuel we don't use.
Absolútne. To téma, ktorá akože môže pokračovať ďalšiu hodinu, ale neviem, či toto je presne to, čo chceme, lebo to naozaj neviem, či to je to, čo chceme.
So, I just want to confirm that I agree with all debaters. I agree that we need to go in depth, and this is where my whole presentation was going, that not only to talk about global figures, that are on a very, you know, they're on the level that is difficult to define. That, you know, that's why the presentation was about the deep dive. And I agree with you, Luigi, when you said that we need to firstly have a look at the energetic efficiency of the buildings, and then you know, we can put the energy into that, because when we have inefficient buildings and then we put in the energy that should produce power, it will be totally inefficient and it will be useless and uselessly spent money. So EPBD should be about that firstly, let's analyze the buildings, then let's talk about the problem, let's solve the problem, and then let's get in the energy that the buildings need, and then we are going to be efficient. I agree with all of you, and I think that the time has come for the next question. I would like to thank you for changing your opinion, because I think that in presentation you mentioned that we do not need to reduce emissions and that Europe doesn't need to do anything. I work in the Institute for Passive Houses, and I need to say that we need to reduce the energy consumptions. And my suggestion is, because I have the feeling that now we need to box each other, and I suggest the opposite. Please start talking in the long term, because you don't know each other from the human perspective or any other perspective. And now you have this kind of debate. But if you open the scissors of the knowledge, of the mutual knowledge, and also of your expertise and experience, and if you keep talking, I think that your rhetorics will also be more peaceful, because now I think it's a little bit like attacking. But anyway, thank you for coming and that you are here, because I'm happy when someone comes and says, I don't like this. I only thanked. I didn't say anything bad. Yeah, I confirm that. But let's go on, and we have plenty of people, and we have nice guests, and I also would like to have some questions from the audience. So if anyone has any question. Okay, are you reflecting in your, oh yes, do you reflect in your opinions also the problem of air pollution? Because there are like over 5,000 people dying prematurely in Slovakia. I don't know where the number comes from. It's difficult for me to express my opinion. We are the organization that deals with the measurement of air pollution. In one moment, we will have more air pollution measurements than our meteorologic institute. And in order to be to the point, please tell me where the data comes from, because then I have a feeling that I'm giving you more sources. I couldn't state the source because I didn't have enough space, but this is the source is the European Environmental Agency. Maybe my colleague could confirm it, but I can send it to you.
Follow up only briefly, as I'm not dealing with the air quality directly, so I would have to verify the number. But indeed, I'm sure that we have an indicator which indicates the mortality in Europe caused by low air quality. But there, it's questionable to what extent it relates to the climate policies and to what extent it relates to the greenhouse gas emissions. As CO2 as itself it's not causing any kind of health disease on people. So this indicator is very more broader and very more complex. I remember that on the website of the European Environment Agency, you can actually access something like an air quality viewer. It's a rather popular product, and the air quality viewer is connected to the already mentioned measuring entities across Europe. We also have some in Central Europe, like Czechia, Slovakia, Poland. Very often we see in the winter that the bordering region, actually the air quality there is rather poor. Of course, there are many causes behind that. It's either industry, but also geomorphology, also the weather conditions, also how the people heat their homes. So it's a combination of a lot of factors. And also when it comes to the air quality, it's also a combination of a lot of emissions, which are not necessarily greenhouse gas emissions.
To je pravda, ale je to veľmi...
This is true, but this is also connected with fossil fuel use in transportation. We can say that there are three sources, which is transportation, heating, and the industry. And this is where the fossil fuels are used, and also, for example, burning of the wood and tires from the cars. This also causes partially, maybe some part of the deaths or mortality, but these reports mention that it is relevant to the climate change. Áno, ja si pamätám, že ten záver je, že musíme si v Európe popracovať ešte na tom, aby sme zvýšili kvalitu ovzdušia. A keďže toto je vlastne priestor, kde sa stretávajú rôzne vedné odbory. Žiaľ, nie som na toto odborníkom, ale určite to pozriem, určite si to skontrolujem. I would get going because we have other questions and we have a question for the New Zealanders. Okay, so how do you process green waste before application into soil? Does it go through standard composting or is it unprocessed raw green waste? Do you do standard composting as here in Slovakia?
Just grab it. It just comes to me from all my contractors and we just put it in place and we let nature do the decomposing of it. So the best way to actually put the nutrients back in the ground is using perfect green waste. In other words, actual green waste. So it's not taken to a yard and decomposed for 6 months and then sold back to you in a bag as decomposed green waste, because that's basically dead product. Because all the microorganisms have done their thing and they're not in that product anymore because it's been decomposed. So you've actually got to put that product on your garden green. So the microorganisms and the bion matter comes in and decomposes it all on the ground, and all the nutrients go into the ground and benefits the ground for the planting that you're going to put in there. And you keep on adding more green waste to that whole ecosystem for your gardens and your trees to benefit from that. And it's also a carbon collector, not just in the ground, because the microbiomes need carbon. That's their main source of energy to do all their connections and with their microorganisms connecting, all that sort of thing. And the insects need that as well. And that all goes into the trees and the gardens. And then they absorb more carbon out of the air. So we've got to look at how we can actually store carbon in another way. I mean, yeah, the carbon in around the world, it's been the same carbon and it has been for millions and millions of years. It's just humans have now got it out of the ground in other forms and fashion and utilising it in other ways, and to the point where we're not balancing it off anymore. We're using more carbon than we've ever used in our lifetime of this planet. And we've now got to put it back in the ground.
So Mark, you don't add anything to the bio-waste?
Nothing.
No worms or?
Nothing.
No? No.
It all arrives.
And the thing about putting it on green is that if you take leaves, okay, we make tea, right? Okay? Put tea leaves in water. Now, you see what comes out of the leaves, all right? That's what you want. That's what green waste puts on the ground. So if you compost it somewhere else, you have lost that first bit of goodness that comes out with water, the leaching. So all of those particular minerals and all of those things are lost if it's composted somewhere else. And so by adding that back, the reason people don't like green waste on the ground is because the agriculture industry doesn't like it, because it causes a temporary nitrogen sink. The initial composting process will take the available nitrogen out of the ground temporarily, and if you're growing crops, you don't want that. But we're not growing short-term crops, we're growing long-term crops, and that nitrogen will come back out later, and you actually want to hold on to that nitrogen temporarily, because then it doesn't go into your water and cause problems with water quality.
So I have a question for the panel, because we're back. I don't want to leave this topic of India out, but so my question to the panel and to you is, should India and China get a pass on the emissions so that they can catch up with the rest of the developed countries in terms of industry? Because right now the argument, of course, that India and China makes is that the West has emitted for so long and they have not. So now it's their chance to emit and catch up through industry. So what do you all think about that? Is that a viable position?
Ja si myslím, že by sme...
I think we all should cooperate, and we all should try to transform our economy and to reduce emissions. I think that this division among the countries, it's quite detrimental because all the countries have some limited opportunities or possibilities. For example, in democracies, we have social inequalities. There are also researchers confirming that the richest people on the planet, they create the biggest carbon footprint. And also there are entrepreneurs that are another actors. Maybe we should also talk about businesses. That's why I don't think that any country should have any pass to emit or to release emissions. I think that we all should reduce the emissions because we already are in a big problem, and we still don't realize that we should really try and do the maximum for that already now. I agree. A moja odpoveď by bola, nemyslím si, že to by bolo múdre. Nie je o tom, kto dobieha koho. Je to o tom, aby sme prišli na to, ako sa spoločne pohnúť k niečomu spoločnému spoločne, čo je vlastne zníženie tej uhlíkovej stopy, aby sme tiež budovali kapacity, financovali to a aby sme budovali na tých poznatkoch. One more thing, when it comes to emission numbers, we need to go in depth. We need to understand how they arise, how they come to being. And as an example, Indian economy is inefficient. It has one of the biggest losses in the power distribution. In 2019, it was already 25% of power or the energy that was lost. Literally lost. Because I know what I'm talking about, we can talk energy till the morning. And the other problem defined in India was lots of black or like illegal distribution or usage. The second one is the quality of distribution network that India must transform. So if we really want to compare emissions among the countries, we need to know why we compare it and what is behind it. If we want to compare the emissions in energy sector between India and Switzerland, we need to understand why do they have such big emissions. And regardless of how we are going to treat it further, without this knowledge, we are just shooting into the black. And we cannot determine the efficient measures that would help us reduce the emissions or the adaptation or whatever, however we call it.
No, maybe just to, it's a bad idea. It's a very bad idea. I think we have the technologies. China also has technology available to grow in a sustainable way. And this is not like an environmentalist approach. We have technologies for efficiency, for generating energy, for water efficiency, with digitalization. All of this can allow like a growth without emissions. So I think the bonus would be like a very bad idea.
So I agree completely. That's a bad idea, but that is constantly the argument, you know. And who will pay for that capital investment for the cleaner way of doing things? You know, India does not want to pay for, you know, upgrading any of their systems because then they think their products are good. You know, right now you're going to India or China because the products are cheap. The labor is cheap, and it's that way. So, you know, people are buying all these products made in India and China, okay? I mean, there's almost nothing in the US that isn't made in China, including Trump's ties, and his Bible is printed in China, you know, his $75 Bible. So it hasn't stopped, you know.
if I am to summarize it, we had a very interesting conversation with Mr. Tadani yesterday, and we talked that until the electricity was, not expensive or the price hasn't risen, we used it everywhere, like for everything, for watering, for you name it. But the moment the energy prices increased, people started to realize that, oops, I should do something about that. So this is the first impulse. The cost Maslow pyramid defines how we behave. If we don't have the money for the bills for electricity, we start to think, how are we going to drinking water coming from the city? And we know that there is some consumption of energy behind that, and people realize that, okay, I can actually retain rainwater, and they knew it. And why? Because of Maslow pyramid. And there will be no other option to teach people how to behave differently than to use something that works with them. If you don't have money for your bills, then you start thinking about it. If you don't have money to pay for your drinking water, then we start thinking what to do with it. And I would I would like to add that Maslow pyramid is a pyramid of values that is changing in time, and the Maslow pyramid has been here since 1945. So I just winded. I just wanted to explain that we have been talking about the psychologist Mr. Maslow. I would just like to add that when we talk about price adjustments or systemic adjustments or changes that we need, we should also think about the social aspect. That even though something goes more expensive, or like the gas or the butter or electricity, all the time we should help those who suffer from energy or transport poverty. So for example, if the state helps you, because it still happens that state subsidizes gas, it should help in a more targeted way. Because what happened last year is that the state subsidized the price of gas for everyone, so also for the millionaires that are using gas to heat their swimming pools, and their motivation to save is zero. So we should motivate people to save, but if there are people that have nothing to save from, these people should be helped with various subsidies on various instruments, for example, like the renewing plan, or the renewing their heating system. Great, let's continue. I would also like the audience to ask a question, because I see that you write, but you can also ask directly. I would like to ask Mr. Vysoky. There should be the question also in Slido. I am interested in the sustainability of the projects that you have presented, because also from the perspective of the weather when it's freezing, and also long-term sustainability, if the pores are not getting clogged, because I think that in Slovakia it's problematic, and then the sustainability is even more expensive than the project itself. Thank you. Thank you for the question, and please answer in Swedish. That was in Swedish. When it comes to sustainability of this solution, this maintenance and the demandingness depends on how we design the space and what are the aesthetic criteria. We work with new systems, and if we nothing really changes because we will still need to maintain the greenery. And so in this respect, nothing changes because we already have these elements. They are separated, and that's why we need to maintain. But by connecting these elements, we will be more efficient when it comes to clogging of the systems. We had a deeper look, and we also made a simulation about whether the system would be in threat. And we noticed that the spaces where we design, for example, residential units or less frequented streets, we know how much sediment is going to be created, and we also looked at the fact if this can really clog the pores. And if you want, I can send you the data that we have computed. But what we concluded was that in order for the system to clog, it would take 600 years. And at 600 years, the infrastructure will definitely change, and maybe we will live somewhere else. So the risk in this case is not really high, but we can help ourselves. For example, if there is if there in the streets is higher level of pollution, we can use these garden beds and rain beds and maintain it. And within the maintenance, we can collect the sediment. And this is another act. For example, we have, like each year, also with our projects, it needs to be cleaned, this sediment bottoms, I think. So whenever we design these elements, we take the maintenance element from the old systems to the new systems. One more remark when it comes to sustainability. It's very important to also do the monitoring. We don't do the monitoring at the moment, and if we do, it's very weak. Today we had the possibility to see the possibilities of monitoring of the infrastructure. And currently we have technologies that can measure the performance of photosynthesis. These are great data that we can process so that the planting projects were more sustainable. 2 years ago, I read one study that was devoted to the research of woods that are planted also here, and that we should focus on the factor such as the fact that not each soil can absorb the same type of DMs, which is, there are soils that can absorb like tenths of the element, then one like half of that, and then and zero. So it's not enough to just make a design of the greenery. In order for the air quality went up, we need to have a look at the type of the woods, how sustainable they are from the perspective of their life cycle. Who would say that someone would be planting fig trees in the gardens in Slovakia? A couple of years ago, we really have moved a lot in the last 20 years. And what does it mean, 20 years? Nothing. We need to have complex information so that the sustainability of green infrastructure gets to normal. Because this is only based on what worked with our grandfather. We need to move on. Mr. Kopkane, I would like to ask a question. Now he tries to speak Czech. And the question is, okay, within this topic, the planting of bushes and the trees, what is the difference? Do you have the data when you observed and monitored? Is there any difference, and do you have any analysis and data about the difference? If we have these things in the big pots before the shopping centers versus the trees or bushes planted without the pot, the flower pot. Do you have any data on that? When it comes to greenery, the problem is in albedo. The greenery has albedo of 0.25, and if it was 0.5, from certain perspective, it could reflect more sunshine. So some of the trees get warm, but if they have enough water, so 25% can be caught up with through the evaporation. So if the tree is well planted and it has access to the water, to the wetness, humidity, it will be okay. But if it is going to be flower pot, it will not have enough wetness or humidity, so the effects might be. But this is just consideration. You don't have any data. The numbers there are, but the greenery needs humidity in order to function well. And what kind of humidity? Rain, water. And 25 years ago at the university, I had a classmate who came here and who was wondering how come we are flushing the toilet with drinking water, or that we are also showering for such a long time, and why we are still watering. It depends. What kind of water you use, and I ask as a layman what to do with that. I worked previously at a military base, and the soldiers have a very good system of how the water is being used or utilized. There are ways how to deal with that, to have a cascade of, okay, I'm having drinking water, then I wash my hands and I flush with it, and then we water the plants. And so it's the question of effort and funding. Okay. We have a sub-question. I would like to tell something to the flower beds, or actually flower pots. You need not only water. The plant also needs enough sufficient space in the pot, and sometimes this is not enough, because if it's too hot, the soil substrate will overheat. But if the plant is planted in the soil directly, they have the access to the cooling, to the natural cooling. And if you have heat in the streets and you have potted trees, they will have not good conditions for growth. And the tree in the pot, seemingly it's green and tall, but I think that it evaporates 1/3 of water compared to when it's planted. So I think it is some solution, but it's incomparable to when it's
Utilising water in a positive way. Jean and I, it all started with the drought in New Zealand 4 years ago. Auckland declared a drought 1 week we were allowed to water our garden and wash our cars and use commercial water. The following week we did the same activity. We were given a $20,000 fine if we were caught. So I just thought, this is ridiculous. Let's go into grey water mode like we do in Australia. And we saved our grey water, and 4 years on we still do. We use our grey water sometimes 3 times to flush our toilet, wash our dishes. We don't use a dishwasher, and we water our garden with it. And our water bill, on average, is $40 a month, which normal water bills in Auckland are about $120 a month. So again, if we give people incentives to do things in a more pragmatic way, and they get an extra dollar in their back pocket to spend on something else like feeding the family or putting vegetables in the garden, I think you'll get people on board with doing things alternatively. And that also applies with giving people incentives with carbon emissions. So if you give people incentives with carbon emissions, I think you'd get people planting trees and gardens wherever they possibly can. They'd be digging up their front yard, their backyard, the roads, the footpaths, putting in trees, because they get a carbon credit. So then they wouldn't have to worry about using a gasoline car to get from A to B, because they can offset what they're using as dirty fuel against what they've planted as green gardens. So I'm here and all the way from New Zealand. I've got so much carbon credit in my property, and I have for 30 years. I don't feel guilty about being here and using a plane to get here and all that carbon, because I'm offsetting it with what I've planted. So again, if governments and councils and even individuals got together and sorted out sort of more incentives for individuals, for carbon credits, grey water credits, whatever you want to call it, we might be on a better path with saving this planet instead of pointing the finger at commercial people doing this in this part of the world and that part of the world. We all need to look at ourselves individually.
I'm still talking with the people. And do we have a data for all of that, for all the trees, for everything, how to plant it? And this is what I said at the beginning, Nokia connecting people, and people just need to talk. They need to listen to each other, to communicate, and to find some common solutions. So I would like to join as a landscape architect, because we have some data. I also encountered it accidentally, because we are not networking. Architects are better than landscape architects. We constantly talk about that. We still have quite big legislation gaps. And the second thing is, if you want to talk about trees, for example, potted trees and so on, there are some species, there are some kinds. And this, yeah, I can get the information for the sellers. We have all the information in the databases, but we just need to start talking about it. Of course, I cannot put any tree into the pot, because the tree might not manage it because of evaporation or because of roots. So for me, just to put some tree into the pot, it doesn't mean that it will actually change something in our location. We are talking about blue-green infrastructure, even though I don't like the word infrastructure, but we need to be defined in some way. But let's talk about some cooperation. How can we do that? Not only in Slovakia, but all over Europe, the return to the nature. And this is one dimension of all of that. Another one is that we as a landscape architects, there is no continuation, because there are construction companies coming to our place, and as we have talked, I would really be happy if we started to network more and if we started to open this discussion behind the round table between those who are making realizations, between the designers and also cities, because the maintenance is really significant, because we can plant million trees, but if there is no maintenance, it will end in down the drain, and this is what makes me angry. From the perspective of data researcher, I will say only one thing. I am a person who drives forward open data exchange politics. So it means that if we have a data that are relative to climate change and climate adaptation, we should share them publicly, because the data that are not shared publicly, they are only in the drawers. Okay, I didn't hear. So she said or mentioned some, Eben. Eben, it's a Dutch kindergarten of the trees. They grow the trees. So, for example, they have a huge database, and this is intersectoral, or in the cooperation between the various fields of expertise. And there are a few of us in Slovakia that are enthusiastic, and especially during the nights or during free time, to comment on anything. Maybe this is a call for all of you to get connected. Mark?
To your planting and pots and things like that. I did a presentation in Auckland last year, just after the floods, the horrendous floods, and a representative from Auckland City Council who put in huge amounts of infrastructure, pipes and other infrastructure, stood up and said, it doesn't matter what any kind of infrastructure we put in place from engineering perspective, nothing will ever deal with that storm that we had in January. There has to be a combination of wetlands and sponge gardening and good infrastructure. And with all three elements, we might be able to handle the floods that are coming our way. And I thought that was pretty significant, coming from a pretty qualified engineer that puts a lot of focus on designing new infrastructure for Auckland and other cities around New Zealand. So getting back to plants in pots, that's all very nice, but I think we need to look at what's in our natural environment and maybe adopt that in the cities that are close to these natural environments and bring those environments into our cities. And I'm doing very much the same in Auckland. I'm just putting back what was there thousands of years ago, I guess, and the maintenance of it is very low. There's no maintenance with it at all. You just clean the footpaths, clean the streets, and you put all the byproducts of leaves and branches that fall off these trees back into those gardens, and it all just decomposes and goes back into the ecosystem. So it's very low maintenance. At the moment, Auckland City Council spends thousands and thousands of dollars of mowing street lawns and looking after one tree, which they ring bark when they weed eat, and it costs so much. Whereas my process is cost effective. It's green waste that normally goes into landfill, and I'm utilising it in a more positive way. So I just think we need to change our approach, how we need to live in our cities, and don't look at our cities as a garnished sort of place. Topiary this, topiary that, hedge clip this, hedge clip that, to the point where it gets beyond reality. It's all about a visual perspective that we're all holding on to and have for quite some time. I think we need to stop that and look at more of a natural approach of how we need to live in our cities.
Žiť v mestách. Okay, and this is something to consider, again, to find some middle ground, because me as a layman, I can see that some minimalist architects start to raise their voices, and we have arrived, and then the ego comes, because I because I have been elected, and therefore I decide, and therefore I don't care about your, herbs and grass and trees and, leaves. And that's why many people in Slovakia don't like me, because I'm the kind of moderator that says it out loudly and honestly, especially politicians. You are not here forever. That's what I tell them, and it's maybe time to think about the fact that we are looking for common solutions and not just to stroke your ego. And I also have my prize. Thank you very much. Yuka would like to say something. I would just like to add, when it comes to the greenery, I really agree with my female colleagues. I think that landscape architects and urbanists should cooperate, and in order for us to change the cities, we should also have a look at the public space. And when it comes to Bratislava, I'm dealing with public spaces in Bratislava, and I can see the link between mitigation, or in the mitigation when it comes to transportation, because transportation in Bratislava still produce more and more emissions, and Bratislava has growing number of vehicles. And when it comes to Bratislava and the number of the cars per capita, we have 700 cars per capita, which is a couple of times more than Vienna. And we can see that lots of public space is devoted to transportation, and these are all reinforced surfaces that are not permeable, and that also impacts negatively our health. We can then talk about the air pollutions. We can also talk about other negative impacts, but for me, it means also the transformation of the public space to create sustainable way of transportation based on walking, cycling, so that in the pyramid on the top there should be a walker, or the one that walks, then bicycles, then public transportation, then electric vehicles, and then individual vehicles. If we continued in this management of public spaces, I think that lots of space for green and blue infrastructure would free out, because then we wouldn't need so much space for parking, for transport. The capacity of the communications would become much, much higher. So, for example, if we have a separate bus line, so it's about the public space. And again, yes, you are right, but there is a human ego, again, getting in the way, because there is habit in Slovakia that if my neighbor has a vehicle, then I also want to have a vehicle, because it's a shame to use public transportation, to use the train and so on. Unfortunately, for example, in New York, everybody travels in a cab, nobody owns a car, or Japan, and the train transportation that is way ahead of us. Our trains are in a terrible condition, and as a regular person, I do agree with each of you, and I like what you talk about, but I will keep reminding you, please connect, please create networks. As Luigi said, he's a lobbyist. We need to somehow, how it's called, ground, the hardness of our politicians. And it would be nice to have the people in the parliament that we do not need to educate, so that we have knowledgeable people who understand what we talk about. This is my perspective. And I don't want to get into that, but imagine that the time has come for a dinner, for a supper. And as a host, I would like to conclude this debate by thanking to all of you. But before, I have remembered one awesome book, and the book is great, not just because I have gifted it to one of my lifelong friends, but it's Jean Jono, The Man Who Planted Trees. I don't know if you know the book. It's a book about a shepherd from Provence who was walking with a stick, and he was making these little holes with the stick, and he kept putting seeds. And in Provence, he planted a beautiful forest. So this is just a reminder that we all start from ourselves, because we all can judge. So thank you, all of you, to all of you debaters, and thank you to also the lady that came with a passion, and I hope will be leaving with a beautiful smile. Thank you to all of you that have accepted the invitation to this conference, and maybe the concluding word can come from Janko. First of all, thank you to all of you that you kept going. Thank you to all that kept watching our online stream. It was quite a lot of people. I think that this first day set the direction of the second day. The first day was more about the research and innovations, and the second day should be about the best practices, so that we can learn from the good examples. Probably everybody has said enough. Please enjoy a dinner, and then we will continue with gala evening. We will have a great jazz band in the back. At the back, you can taste the beautiful wines. And I've had such tasting at the drone conference, and I already took 2 cartons because they were really great. So please do not hesitate and try these wines. They are awesome. Please enjoy this evening so that you don't forget it, because that was our goal. Have a great evening.